We're talking today with Ron Dykstra of Rockford, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay. Now, Ron, can you start us off with some background on yourself? Let's start with where and when you were born.
I was born in Holland, Michigan, July 6th of 1948.
Okay. Now, did you grow up in Holland, or did you?
No, my mother happened to be vacationing on the beach in Holland, and my twin brother and I decided to come early. So we always lived in Grandville, but I was born in the Holland Hospital.
All right. Now, what did your family do for a living at that time?
My father was a salesman for Wolverine Worldwide.
And did your mother stay at home, or did she have a job?
Yes,
Okay.
Mother was she stayed home the whole time with the kids. So there were 5 of us, but at the end there were 5 of us. So.
All right. Now, so you went to high school in Grandville then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then what did you do after you graduated?
Well, I graduated from Grandville and decided that it was I went off to Fair State College and took a 2-year commercial art course. Took 2 straight years because I wanted to make my senior year a little easier and I could focus more on my portfolio work. So I went 2 straight years and didn't take a summer off. And when I did take the summer off, I got drafted. So.
Or had you not registered for fall?
I did not register for fall quarter, and I should have. Should have been smarter than I was at that time, and I was drafted. So.
Okay. Now, what did you know about Vietnam at that point?
Well, the time I was in school I graduated in 1966, so there was an awareness that we were going to, if you weren't in college or didn't have a deferment, there's a good chance that you were going to be drafted. And when I came back when I finished my college 2 years, it was 1968. By that time, one of my best friends who only lived a block away came home in a box, and right away I knew that I was in trouble here because of that. And my best friend had just come back because he graduated from high school in '66 and he was drafted and he was gone, and he had just come back from Vietnam, and he didn't say much. He didn't talk to us much. He was a different person when he came back. So I knew that I was in trouble once I got that draft notice that I was going to be a goner.
Okay. Did you have much of a sense of what the war was supposed to be about?
Yeah, I did. I mean, coming from Grandville, Michigan, this everybody, we're going to fight communists, keep communists off our shores. I mean, that's what it was all about. But my grandfather had all served, and everybody said, well, if it happens, it happens. You're going to serve your country. You're going to do, and we did. I mean, that's one of those things that I knew that, but I didn't like what that solution was, that it was going to happen. So.
All right. Now, when did you actually have to report for duty?
I reported for duty on March 3rd of 1969. So it was literally, about 9 months after I got my draft notice, I was gone. I mean, it was, I got the draft notice, well, it was less than that, because I got the draft notice in '68, let's say roughly August, September of '68, and I was gone by March 3rd. Okay.
So why was there a time lag in between? Did they just tell you, when to report?
Right. They basically said, well, first of all, you had to go get a physical to make sure that you were up to their standards. And I went, the 281 was the draft board in Grand Rapids, and they bust you to Detroit. You'd go through your physical, and then, you'd come home and say, yeah, you're ready. And then they would give you a certain time when you'd have to report, and then you were done. So then, again, you would go into Detroit, they would do a final physical, make sure everything is right, and then they'd send it off to where you're going to be, do your basic training. Okay. So.
Now, at the time you were going in, were there people who were trying to find ways to beat the physical, or? Not
to the level that I understood in '68, '69. I didn't see that as much as I did in '70 when I came out. I saw more and more and heard more and more of the drinking a case of Coke or eating a bunch of bananas or how to beat the physical thing.
Right.
I didn't hear that until I came back in '70. So.
Okay. All right. Now, where did they send you for basic training?
I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and basic, just like everybody else's training. Went down there, thought I was in pretty good shape. Wasn't a four-letter athlete, but I did some athletic things, and thought I was in pretty good shape, but boy, they tear you down. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That the nice thing for me is when I got down there, and it was one of those things that was frustrating for me, is that you get there, they've taken you away from your family, they've shaved your head, they lined me up in this big formation, and they said, there was like 200 of us in this formation, and they said, anybody that's had a felony, fall out. Anybody that's had this, fall out. Before you know it, there was like 20 of us standing in this formation, and I'm saying, what is going on here? And there was a small little church that was right in front of us, and they said, the rest of the guys, you fall out for 2 hours. You 20, wanted us to go in this church. And basically what they was is that we were the type of people that they wanted, and in the building there were like 5 or 6 stations, and they said, would you like to volunteer for a Green Beret? Would you like to volunteer for a Warrant Flight Officer? Would you like to volunteer for OCS? And every one of these you had to extend another year on your service. And all of us are saying, you got to be crazy. Well, hindsight is, I should have taken one of those opportunities, because it would have been instead of just being another grunt that gone into Vietnam and come back, you'd have had the opportunity to, but the potential of spending a minimum of a year to 2 years in Vietnam was a little bit daunting when, like I said, they've just taken you from your family and shaved your head, and now they're offering you this great deal. Yeah. It didn't sound like a good deal to me at that time.
And some of those jobs could have been pretty dangerous, too.
Yes, they should have. You know, a chopper pilot or you know, like I said, Green Beret, OCS, you're going to be in charge of a company, I mean, as an officer. So, yeah, they would have been a different, but they had selected the best. They knew they had picked the people they wanted to offer this to. And I was one of them that said, no, enough's enough, guys. I'm going to stick with what I got.
All right, and how did they handle that? Did they just accept that and let you go on?
Yep. They just said, okay, fall out. You know, you walk through, you had to sit at each station, and you had to listen to their spiel. And then after you'd done all of them, if you had to make a decision before you left the room, they said, okay, you've got to make the decision if you're going to accept one of these opportunities. And if not, you can fall back out with the rest of them. So that's what I did.
All right. Now, as you were going through basic training, I mean, how easy or hard was it for you just to adjust to military life and military discipline?
It wasn't hard for me, because I had come. My upbringing was, you know, respect and yes sir, no sir, that sort of thing. So for me, it was an easy transition. You didn't make waves. I didn't make waves. I said yes sir, no sir. I did what I had to do to make it as easy as I could for myself. It was tough. It was, it wasn't fun, but it was one of those things that I made it as easy as I could for myself. So for me, it was an easy thing to do. It was hard.
Okay. Now, the people around you, how did they respond to it?
A lot of them were, we had people that just went crazy type of thing. I mean, literally, that fought it the whole way. That I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. Where I said, if that's what you say, I'm going to do that. And so there was a lot of them that had hard times. I mean, they were doing more push-ups, and they were getting more, in trouble for the things they were doing, because they weren't trying to follow the, as we say, follow the leader, And I just didn't want to make waves. I wanted to get it over with as quick as possible.
Now, what proportion of them made it through that process?
I would say that we probably had, I'm going to say 90%.
Okay.
You'd lose a few, and they would be shipped off and brought back to another basic training unit. But they beat you all down, but most of them were enough to where they could say, hey, we'll make it. And before you know it, we all looked alike. We all acted alike, because they had done what they were supposed to do. Treat us as one person,
Okay. Now, how long was the basic training at that point?
I think basic training was 13 weeks. Okay. I mean, from start to finish, and then you graduated from basic training.
And what's your next step?
You'd have a big formation, and then you would be given your orders, and they would call out people's names and where you were going. The minute they said where you were going, you knew where you were, what was happening. I was called out, and it was Fort Polk, Louisiana, jungle training. Done deal. I wasn't going to be a cook. I wasn't going to be a clerk. I knew what I was going to be going to do. My best friend that went in from Grandville and graduated with me, he went in with me. He was made a clerk, and he was a clerk in Fort Knox for his 2 years. I was unlucky and ended up being an infantry, well, going to Fort Polk for jungle training.
Okay. So what was the facility at Fort Polk like?
The facilities weren't any much different than the facilities at Fort Knox, because we were in the old wood barracks at Fort Knox that had, half-inch of paint on them, because every time a new unit came in, you had to paint the barracks. They were fire traps. Fort Polk was very similar, but Fort Polk had the heat, the humidity that Fort Knox didn't have. Fort Knox was, Michigan climate type of thing, and it was, we didn't have this much problem. When you got down to Fort Polk, it was hot, humid, wet. It was nasty.
Yeah, well, now you're in Louisiana in the summer too.
Yeah, and I'm in the summer in Louisiana, exactly right. And so it was snakes and scorpions and all that kind of monkey business. I mean, one of the incidents I had was we were on our bivouac, which was 7 days of being in the, it's in the woods there, but it's not the jungle, but it was trying to create the same effect. They paired you up in pairs, and then you had to go through this bivouac, which was 7 days of trying to stay alive in the jungle or in the woods. Well, he was a smoker, and it was hot. It was nasty. And what we had to do is we had to dig a foxhole, and you had to dig a foxhole it had to be shoulder height to the tallest person. So he was probably 8, 9 inches shorter than me, so he had to put a little step in there for himself because he had to be shoulder height so he could fire his weapon. It was hot. He said, I got to have a cigarette. So he went to jump down in the foxhole that we had dug the previous day. Well, a rattlesnake had burrowed itself into the wall of the foxhole. Well, when he jumped in there, he came out faster than he went in. We didn't have weapons that had live ammo, and we had, a flash suppressor on the end. So we had to call somebody over, and they dug this rattlesnake out, and it was a big, long rattlesnake, and they shot and killed this rattlesnake. But I'm saying, this is ridiculous. And then every morning when we got up, you had to shake out your boots, or you had to check your clothes because scorpions would get into your boots and slide your boot in. We had one man who was exhausted after a long hike with a pack, and he just fell down. He didn't look where he was sitting. He sat right on a scorpion. So, and then we had to do a compass course where you had to triangulate a compass course. My partner with me, he had been breaking brush for probably 2/3 of it, and he said, okay, will you take over? The minute I took over, we walk into the swamp here, and here's this big old water moccasin 6, 8 feet in front of us, and we said, well, we're going to change the azimuth. We're not going to go where it tells us to go. We got where we were supposed to get, but another one of those incidents where, it wasn't as easy as people think it might have been. It was tough. It was real tough.
What sorts of people did they have training you?
People that had come back from Vietnam. And that's something that I took and I learned from, because they had been there, they had survived, and they came back to train us, and they trained you very well at what you were going to be going to. They knew where you were going because you're, where you had been stationed for your AIT, advanced training. So.
Right. Now, what were there particular tricks or pieces of advice they gave you, or things they told you that wound up being useful?
I didn't pick up on any. I mean, I got more in the first 10 days in Vietnam than I ever got from them. I had gotten my body in shape because of the heat, humidity. There wasn't an ounce of fat on my body at that time because you couldn't have it. And so I did that, and I learned that you had to be observant. You had to be observant of every little thing, and that's what we learned in the compass course and everything we did. You had to be observant of what you were doing at all times. It wasn't just go out, do it, come back. You had to be observant of every aspect of that.
But there were just the specifics of actually surviving in the particular area of Vietnam that you got to. That was going to be dependent on what you saw there.
Right. But that would be when you got to let's say Cam Ranh Bay. They would give you a basic understanding of what was going to go on in Vietnam. But when you got to your unit, now you're getting specifics about what territory and what your unit is facing. And so every little thing you had to You had to be sharp and pick up on it and make sure that you remembered what they said, and that's the only way you were going to come home alive, in my opinion.
All right. So you get through the AIT. Now, is that another about 13 weeks? Or?
That was 10 weeks.
That was 10.
Yeah.
Okay. So at this point, do you get to go home before they ship you out? Or?
Yeah. You get a 30-day leave, because when you graduate from AIT, you've got your orders, and my orders were to Vietnam. So once you got those orders, you got let's say a 30-day pass, where I got to go home, and that was a tough 30 days. Any way you look at it, when you know you're going into where you may never come home, and you got 30 days with your family, your friends, whatever, it's a tough time. I mean, it's a tough 30 days. For me, I was an old person at that time. I'm 21 years old, so most guys that were going through that experience were 19, by the time they were going over. And but it was still tough. It was still a tough thing to go through. And you live fast and hard and whatever you can do for that month. And then that last day, man, it's over.
All right. Now, do you have to get yourself out to the point of embarkation, or?
Yeah. You had to have somebody, like I said, I had somebody take me to the airport, and then basically we were given orders and you have given a ticket and a time and when you'd have to leave. So.
Okay. So where did then you ship out of? I
shipped, basically what happened is I flew right out of Grand Rapids and went into. Had to report to Seattle, and right out of Seattle is where you got your order. Everything was, they gave you everything you needed to go overseas.
Okay.
So,
and then do you go out of Fort Lewis or out of the Seattle airport? Or?
Well, Fort Lewis, yeah,
okay.
Because it was a military transport, and we flew in from Fort Lewis. Basically, they were supposed to do a complete check of you at Fort Lewis to make sure you're ready for in-country, and then they loaded you on a transport. And it was basically a commercial plane, Flying Tiger, or whatever it was called. They normally would fly cargo, but they turn them to get people over, and it wasn't TWA, Pan Am. It was a Flying Tiger or some transport line.
All right. Now, did they give you all of the preparation and stuff before you left that they were supposed to?
No. Basically, when I left Fort Polk, Louisiana, they gave us a month's supply of malaria pills. You were supposed to take a white pill 6 days a week and an orange pill 1 day a week. The orange pill gave you the runs. And basically what you were supposed to do is your body was supposed to be getting you ready for what you were going to be in Vietnam, and that's potential for malaria. When you landed in Seattle, they were supposed to take blood, draw blood, and look at it and make sure that your body had taken and accepted that malaria pill. They didn't do that. Well, they may have taken the blood, but they didn't review it and look at it enough, because my body was rejecting the malaria pills, and I should have never been sent to Vietnam. They should have found that in Seattle and said, you can't go because your body is rejecting the malaria pill, and sent back home, but that was not done.
Okay. All right. And then you fly to Vietnam. Did they fly directly from Fort Lewis to Vietnam?
No, we flew into Guam, and they landed on the runway, and all we saw in Guam was B-52s on the runway, and they told us to get off the hangar, and we could go in and use the restrooms in the hangar, and then they refueled the plane, and then we flew into Tokota Air Force Base in Japan, and landed the same thing, where we flew into Japan, see all the bright lights and all that, let us go into this hangar, and you can get a candy bar or go to the back, and then they would refuel. And then we went from Tokota Air Force Base in Japan, went right into Cam Ranh Bay.
All right. Do you remember what time of day you got in?
It was, from what I can remember, we left Tokyo late night. It was dark, so we got in early in the morning in Vietnam.
Okay. And what was your first impression of Vietnam when you got off the plane?
Flying in, you couldn't see much because it's not like a big lit city. Cam Ranh Bay was a lit city, and you say, oh, this is just like a regular air base, and flew in. But the first sense was the heat and humidity when we got off. I mean, it was nothing like what I had experienced in Louisiana. I mean, it just was nothing. It was that much more heat and humidity. Other than that, that was the first thing I remember. And then it, I think then the real anxiety set in and said, boy, we're in trouble now. You know, we knew where we were at, and I knew exactly what was happening. And I thought, boy, this is going to be a long year for the, and for me, I mean, it was the start of a long year for a young person. I mean, even at 21, I was still young.
All right. Now, what do they do with you once you get off the plane?
They basically, they give you the they give you information of what you, make sure your paper, your orders are in right. Then they go you through for 2 or 3 days, they go through they show you what a claymore mine is going to do and how a booby trap is going to set up and yada yada and all these kind of things. Just basic training of Vietnam and the heat, humidity, what you may have to, what you may come and confronted with. They also talk about drugs. They also talk about you know those kind of things. But then it's a matter of you were probably there 3 or 4, maybe 5 days at the most.
Now, did they also talk to you about sort of how to deal with the civilian population or anything like that?
They may have. I don't even. It was the furthest thing in my mind. The most important thing was just get home safe, and
okay.
So 4 or 5 days of that, and then they sent you to your unit. Basically, they would divide up, you know, and once they got 5 or 6 guys, they'd get whether it was a plane, a C-130, or a helicopter, depending on how far you were going, they would fly you to your new unit.
Okay. So what unit did you get assigned to?
I was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, or as everybody knows, the Big Red One. So.
And what particular unit within it were you assigned to?
I was assigned to Alpha Company of the 21st Infantry, and we were out of Dak Chang, and basically the area of operation for that unit was basically southeast and northeast of Saigon, and what terrain we were in would be rice paddies, Michelin rubber plantation, which was the world's largest rubber plantation, and the Saigon River is basically what we worked out of, or what terrain we saw.
All right. Now, was your company, when you joined your company, was it on a fire base? Was it in the field? Or
well, what happens is you go into your unit's your fire base, and you'd sit there for, you might be there 2 or 3 days, getting acclimated, giving you the gear, because right at this point, everything you've done, you have not got a weapon yet. You don't have your backpack. You don't have anything you need to survive in the jungle. And so they've given you all that stuff. Then you go out on a resupply chopper when the units, sometimes the unit would be coming back into the fire base and you'd join the unit then. Other times you'd go out in a chopper, and I went out in a chopper, a resupply chopper. Basically every 3 or 4 days they'd get resupplied with sea rations and water. So you'd go out on a resupply chopper, and that's what I did. I was a new guy with a new uniform getting off that chopper out there in the jungle. So,
what do you remember anything about that chopper ride?
It was scary. It was scary because you knew what you're going into, but you didn't know what you're going into. You knew that you were going to be that new guy that you hope to be alive the next day, let alone for a year. And but basically got off the chopper, and the unit at the time, typical infantry units, about 65 men, and they were in their in a perimeter formation. And I was assigned to November platoon, and went over there, met the lieutenant, met the first sergeant, and then I was assigned to a squad that I was going to be a member of.
Okay. Now, about how many men were in the platoon and the squad when you joined it?
Platoon was probably about a 20, 25 men, and so each squad was about a 5-man squad, 5 or 6-man squad. I mean, it was a small, there were only 3 platoons in a company,
right,
and each company had, like I said, 65 or 70 men, so it was about a 20-man, 25-man platoon.
So those are sort of significantly below paper strength for those units, which should have been a lot larger.
Yeah, typically, that's what we were. Every unit I was ever with was about that strength, and for me, that's just the way we operated. Right. But as the new guy, you were always pushed out in the front because the old guys didn't want to take chances, so they always put you out in the front. But It was a real learning experience. There's no doubt about it.
Now, how long was it before you actually went out? Did you join them in the field at that point?
I joined them. They had to in the field. Typically, the missions that we worked on in the 1st Infantry Division were 7 to 10 day missions. We'd go out and do search and destroy, basically looking for the enemy. We would move anywhere from 2 to 4 miles a day in the heat and humidity. Our pack was, a normal infantry pack weighed about 50 pounds, and that is because you had to carry claymore mines, hand grenades, 5 or 6 hand grenades, a couple of claymore mines. Typically, the 1st Infantry Division, we had to carry 10 18-round magazines for our M16. Everybody had to carry at least 1 smoke grenade, besides all your food, a shovel, because we dug foxholes every night, so we had a shovel, entrenching tool, and then some personal items. You could carry letter writing stuff, or I carried a camera and I had letter writing things, and not much personal, but anything you had to have in your pack, if it wasn't waterproof, you had to wrap it in plastic, otherwise it was gone instantly. I remember going over there, my folks had got me a Bulova watch for graduation from high school, and I wore my Bulova watch over there, and it was one of these beautiful watch. I loved the watch, water resistant watch. It was ruined in less than a month. I mean, the heat and humidity, it just ruined that watch. So, but I mean, other than that, that's your thing. You had this pack you had to carry. We got up every morning, you made your meal, you packed your pack, and then we'd move out for another mission. And basically, we would be given missions where we want to check out another trail or check out another, and you'd have to move 2 to 4 miles. Some of those triple canopy jungle where you're breaking brush, just trying to get through. Other times it was a little more open, you could move quicker. But because you never knew where there were booby traps and all those other dangers, you couldn't move fast. So we didn't move very fast, but we still had to cover a lot of distance.
Okay. Now, when you moved, did you do it normally kind of single file spread out, or did you go?
What we did is the 1st Infantry Division was an organized unit. They'd already been in country probably 5 or 6 years. 1st Infantry Division never walked on a trail, on a hard trail. We all walked two on a file on each side of that trail is what we moved into the jungle. And one of those incidences where I had problems with animals in Vietnam. We were breaking brush, and a deer was spooked in between the 2 columns. Well, it was close to where I was, and it went running across and then it came up to another man, turned around, and it had a full head of steam back at me because we were probably 50 feet apart. Well, it hit me, and deers over there are about the size of a good-sized collie. Well, it hit me below the knees. And now I got my weapon and a 50-pound pack. Well, it flipped me right over. The weapon went flying, and I could not believe how hard that deer had hit me, but it wanted to get out. So that's the way the infantry did, the 1st Infantry did. We just worked on either side of the trail, never on a trail, because we knew the trails were always booby-trapped. We just knew they were booby-trapped.
Right. Now, would there be booby traps sort of also in the jungle? I mean, would the locals?
Not as often, because a lot of the units use the trails. We got to a point in the 1st Infantry Division where even then we'd hit some booby traps, and we started getting frustrated, so we started setting our own booby traps. People don't realize that you get frustrated enough losing men, getting men, losing legs and this and that. You're going to do something to stop that. So we started setting out our own booby traps. And what we did was take a claymore mine, a battery from one of our radios. We took a clothespin with a spring on it. We took the plastic straight part of a spoon. We cut off the spoon part and basically run tripwire into that plastic spoon. We'd put the claymores facing the trail. You could put 2 claymores on one battery. You'd hitch them. Then you'd run it to the battery. The battery would have a wire coming off. The wire would go on either side of the clothespin. Then you'd put a plastic spoon between it. The clothespin would be tied to the tree, and the other part of the tripwire would be tied to the tree. And the minute that tripwire was pulled, the claymores would blow. And so what we were doing is we would set out 5-man ambush position every night. The CP, the company area, would set up in a perimeter, and then they'd send out these 5-man ambush positions. What we would do then would we would put booby traps on either side of the trail that we were ambushing, and we would set the booby traps. The friendlies could move from dusk to dawn. So the minute it got dark, we knew we could set our booby traps out, but we had to retrieve them in the morning before it got light.
Right.
And got very successful with them. Saved I can guarantee it saved a lot of Army guys' lives because we weren't walking into theirs, and they started getting frustrated with the 1st Infantry Division because we were blowing a lot of them away in our own booby traps.
So they were using the trails at night?
They used them at night, yes. See, again, the Vietnamese, the VC and the NVA, they moved at night. We were afraid of the night.
Right.
We didn't move at night. We didn't do anything at night. You didn't move at night. And that's what it was all about.
Now, when you were encamped at night, would they attack you in one way or
Yes, yes. If, like I said, previously we had times where we weren't setting out booby traps, they would walk into our kill zone, because every night we would dig foxholes. Our 5-man ambush position, we would dig 3 foxholes facing the trail, put out our claymore mines, and then we would normally have 1 man in a foxhole awake at all time. And then basically if they walked into the kill zone, you'd blow them away. So, and like I said, I was lucky enough to have a successful platoon that we had a 5-man squad that I was part of that we'd set up on a trail that was coming right out of the Cambodian border. I mean, we knew it was a hard-packed trail. And we had a 5-man squad, dug our foxholes, set up, had 10 NVA, which NVA is, they're just as equipped as we are. Walked into our kill zone, we blew our claymores. Every man fired a 18-round magazine. We had a machine gunner ran a 50-round belt, and we threw 35 hand grenades before we went out the kill zone. And we never took a round in. And when we went out the kill zone, we had 10 dead NVA. We needed a resupply of ammunition and claymores and hand grenades, so we were surprised to see a major come in his little loach to bring our resupplies, and he was just dumbfounded. He said, "My God, you guys are great. This is wonderful." Yeah. Gave us our hand grenades and our ammo, and then what we did is we threw the bodies in our foxholes and covered them up a little dirt, moved down the trail another 50 or 100 feet. The next night we didn't have anything happen, but the following night we had 12 of them walk into the kill zone. We blew all 12 of them away, never took a round in again. Same thing happened. Major comes down to resupply us, and he says, "I don't know what else to say. This is out." He said, "You guys in 3 days killed 22 NVA. We said, "Yeah, well, what's our job out here?" You know. But it was one of those things that I was in a great unit, and I learned to be a great infantry guy because of that. If I'd have been with another unit, there are too many other had horror stories.
Now, were there other platoons were the other platoons in the company pretty good as far as you could tell?
They all were. They all were. Every one of them was in. We just happened to be on the right trail at the right time, or we happened to be doing the right thing here and there. But the whole unit was a good unit. I mean, I was lucky enough to be with a great bunch of guys. We didn't lose a lot of men. I mean, yeah, we had guys wounded and hurt, but we didn't lose a lot of men. We lost some, but we didn't lose a lot.
Now, when you joined the unit, did anybody make any effort to kind of explain to you how things worked and what you were going to have to do?
Yeah, you did, but typically somebody would feel sorry for you because you were the new guy staring off in no man's land, not knowing what you were doing, and somebody would take you under their wing and try to say, "You got to do this, you got to do that. Don't do this, don't do that." You know, I had an issue at one time where I had a dive watch on. Near the end, I realized that the only thing that's going to survive the rain and being wet all the time was a dive watch. Well, I bought a dive watch at the PX and didn't realize that illumination was pretty bright. And I was moving my arm around, and one of the guys said to me, "You better put your hand or cover that up because it was, somebody could see that and know where you're at." So, but no, the guys they tried to help you along, and it didn't take long. It didn't take a couple of months in the field, and you were a seasoned veteran, as I say. I mean,
you also mentioned that when you got there was a tendency to take the new guy and put him out in the front.
Oh yeah, point squad. You know, at the point squad, you'd be in point squad, no doubt.
But would you actually walk point in the point squad when you started?
You wouldn't walk point maybe that first week, but you'd be on the point squad. And the point squad they're the guys out there going to get, if anything's going to happen, they're the ones that are going to hit it.
Okay. Now, in that period when you're with the 1st Infantry Division, what kind of enemy activity was going on? Was it kind of just the small patrol stuff?
We had a lot of, we had a lot of VC patrol. The Michelin rubber plantation was a lot of, basically the straw hat, black pajama VCs. We had a lot of them. And we were setting up ambushes all over the Michelin rubber plantation. And they knew that they weren't supposed to be moving at night, and that's when we were doing our best. And we were taking a lot of enemy kills. We were good at it. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And we knew how to set up a good position. And so it was from my perspective, the terrain was as good as it can be for what you were doing. There's some other terrain that you couldn't imagine. That there's no way you can see the enemy there, but we were in areas where we could see them pretty well. One person always had a starlight scope in each platoon, so you could, so we could see the movement. You could hear the movement. You basically pull guard 2 or 3 times a night, 2-hour shift, and you might get 3 hours of sleep, but trust me, it wasn't sound sleep. Even a twig breaking, you were wide awake. I mean, your senses were so honed in the jungle that I came back, I couldn't believe how quick you could hear the fire alarm could go off and I wouldn't wake up. But over there, any little sound, you were awake instantly. And that's just because your body knew what it had to do, and you got sharp. You got real sharp.
Okay. Now, were there a lot of civilians and things in the areas that you were patrolling?
Yeah, there were, and during the day. So we knew that at night they were telling the VC where we were at.
Right.
I mean, we just knew that was happening because during the day they were your friends, at night they weren't. I mean, it was just one of those issues that you knew that. You'd see them when you were walking. You'd see them, but you knew that wasn't. You just knew that. You knew that the kids, the adults, you knew that somebody was coming in their house and threatening their family. They're going to tell them where the unit is. So there's no doubt about it. But I had some. We've had, I was one of these. Come from this little western Michigan area and had been brought up in a strong Christian Reform background, and I had so many things happen to me that let me know that there was a reason that I survived Vietnam. There was a reason that I came home. There was a reason for all of that, because on one incident, every time we came into the fire support base, we come in for 3 days, 2 to 3 days, come in, get a hot meal, clean shower, and then go out. In the field, they would resupply us every 3 or 4 days with sea rations and water mainly, and then they bring out mail. The clothes would come in they'd bring out 3 duffel bags of clothes for each platoon. The platoon leader each squad would send over a man to pick up 5 shirts, 5 pants, 5 pair of socks and underwear. Didn't matter what size, you just grabbed 5 of each, and you gave them to your guys. Didn't matter if it was an extra large and it was a small, it doesn't matter. That's what you grabbed out of that bag. You weren't very stylish, but it was clean from that perspective. Every 3 or 4 days, you at least get some clean clothes, because you were sweating so bad in the heat and humidity. And then you'd move you'd do your thing for 7 to 10 days, so you might get resupplied only once. Once in a while, they'd bring out a hot meal from the rear. If not a hot meal, we learned that the sea rations, they were nasty. And so what we had to do is we had to, you had to spice them up. So a lot of guys used Tabasco sauce and other things, but we learned to heat them, because Some of them, I found one that was packed in 1959, and I was there in 1969, so it had been in a can for 10 years. We basically used C4 plastic explosives to heat our C rations, and what we did is every guy got a chunk of plastic explosives, and you basically pinch off a piece, and you roll it into about a half-inch ball, and you'd light it, and it would heat your food instantly and really hot. So you'd use it for your cocoa in the mornings, because 75 degrees in the morning was cold. You were cold, you wanted something warm. And your meals, like I said, you could heat your meals with a C4. And that was one of the things, at least you had a meal that was a little bit warm. And one of those, those items that they would bring out, and the water, you had to use a purification tablet in all your canteens. I was a sweater, so I carried 9 one-quart canteens on my back. Well, that's a lot of weight, but I needed that to move. You needed that for, let's say, 2 or 3 days worth of moving. You had to use purification tablets in each one of your canteens. It made it taste like shit. I don't care what anybody says. They were terrible. So what I did is I had sent in my letters home, I had said, look, guys, can you send me packs of Kool-Aid? Just every letter you write me, send me Kool-Aid. So that what I was doing is I was putting Kool-Aid in my canteens, and at least it would take some of that nasty taste of the purification tablet away. But you had to do what you had to do. And so from that perspective, you'd like I said, we'd eat, we'd move, and then some missions lasted longer. We'd go into the rear, we would get a hot meal, clean clothes, showers. We could go get to the mess hall and get meals. They had movies, and you could have beer. And then they would call out another mission, and you go out in the field. Basically, we would come, they would bring us from the airstrip to the base camp in a 2.5 truck, which is a 2.5-ton Army military truck. They'd load 10 or 12 guys in the back of each truck, bring them to the base camp, then you'd get cleaned up. And the barracks there on the base camps, fire support base, whatever you want, were basically wood sides halfway up, elevated off the ground. The top half would be screens, and they would have a metal roof. Inside would be cots. When you'd come in for your 2 or 3 days of stand down, is what we called it, you'd basically throw your gear at a cot, and that's what you'd sleep on, would be a cot. And then, like I said, you'd get resupplied. They would resupply us. They'd bring in a pallet of C rations and say, okay, guys, we're going to go on a mission. You better pack 3 or 4 days worth of meals. Make sure your grenades, make sure your ammo's up and all that. One time we were standing around a 55-gallon drum that we were burning. C rations come in a cardboard box, and they have a lot of wrappers and papers around some of the stuff, and you'd throw in. So we had this 55-gallon drum. It was burning, throwing our trash in it. It was cold, and it was getting ready for a mission, so it was early in the morning, and we were all standing around there getting warm. Like I said, 75 degrees is cold. Anybody tell you that? You're crazy. But when it's 110 during the day, that's a 40-degree temperature drop. Your body has a hard time adjusting. There were 13 of us standing around that trash can. We don't know for sure whether somebody had thrown some C ration cans. We didn't know if somebody maybe in one of these boxes, one of their hand grenades had gotten in the box, but it went in the drum. Well, all of a sudden the drum exploded. And this 55-gallon drum turned into shrapnel. And of the 13 guys that were getting ready to go out to the field on a new mission, there were only 11 of us that went out that day. Or 2 of us that went out. 11 of them didn't go out that day. The guy on both sides of me were bleeding out of the ears and had shrapnel wounds all over him. Another guy across from us had nothing. Me and him, we checked our uniform. The guy said, I said, no, I didn't get a scratch. I knew somebody was watching out for me. And so of that day, there were only 2 of us that went out of that 13 guys.
Now, were you going with the rest of the company?
We just blended in with another unit and went until these guys, whether they came back or whether their wounds were healed. Most of them were just shrapnel and bleeding out of the ears from the concussion of this 55-gallon drum exploding. But again, it wasn't just the enemy that we were fighting. It was all these other things that you had to be aware of. We would load up on the 2.5s after a resupply, after getting ready for a new mission. we'd go out on the airstrip. Typically, they would dump us on the airstrip. We would set on our packs until the choppers came in. The choppers would come in on typically 4 or 5 choppers per lift is what we call them. And each lift would hold roughly a platoon. And because at the time that we were loading the choppers, artillery at the fire support base was already firing our LZ, our landing zone. Typically, the chopper pilots would have been given directions saying, when you take off from the air base, you have to bank left and then do a big circle, and by the time you get there, the LZ will have stopped firing. I was on the first lift this time. Our chopper pilot took off, banked right in front of our artillery. The guns were firing. We heard a round go by the chopper. It was so close, we swore we almost got shot down by our own artillery. The chopper pilot turned, landed on the airstrip, and walked away from that chopper. He knew that he almost got himself, his co-pilot, the 2 door gunners, and a 5-man crew almost shot himself down. So we had to get on another chopper and go out in the field that time. So you had to, everything was against you. It wasn't that everything was working for you,
Now, you mentioned when you're with the 1st Division, there are different environments you worked in, and you were talking about being on the rubber plantation. What was it when you were on the Saigon River? I mean, what were you doing there?
Well, the Saigon River some of them moved on these little sampans and little boats, so we had to keep an eye on the river, and so we would ambush typically along the side of a bank of a river. There would be a trail, and someone would move real close to the river, and someone would move on the river, and so we had to set up on the river. And but the problem with being set up on the river or the Saigon River or any river in a wet, humid climate, the mosquitoes were horrendous. I was on an ambush position one night where I'm supposed to be alert, listening, and looking for the enemy. And the mosquitoes were just driving me crazy. The buzzing around my ears was just so bad. I put my poncho on, and I tightened the poncho around my face. I stuck cigarette butts in my ears. I lit a cigarette and was blowing the smoke around. You couldn't see the lit cigarette because I was cupping it, but I was blowing smoke around, trying to keep these mosquitoes from driving me crazy. And I'm on guard duty, and I'm supposed to be alert. So, and that's when I came down. I know that's when I came down with malaria for the first time. Was when we were the operation around the Saigon River. Is that they were just so thick, the mosquitoes.
Okay. Now, they didn't have insect repellent, or did they have it and it didn't work?
I think they liked it. I think they liked the insect repellent, and that's why a lot of guys, you always see in the movies, the guys have a little insect repellent in their band on their helmet. But we used it, but it just didn't seem. I think they had understood what it was, and they didn't care. They were bad mosquitoes, but it was one of those things. I know that's when I got malaria for the first time,
And how much effect did the malaria have on you during that time in Vietnam?
Well, for me, it was, again, like I said, I should have never gone to Vietnam, but when I was dusted off the first time by the medevac chopper and taken to the 25th evac hospital, they packed me in ice for almost 12 hours to get my temperature down because it was over 104 for almost 24 hours, and the doctor came to see me, and they had intravenous bottle in me for 4 days. I went through 12 bottles, and I had a scar on my arm for years after that, where that bottle had been in there for so long. And when the doctor came to talk to me, he says, your body didn't have this malaria, in it like it should have. But now that you got it, we're just going to keep you here. And that's another one of those Army tricks. Yep. Let's keep you here. You've already done it. Let's do it. So, but that was, that's just what it was. And it was a tough one. Typically, for me, the first bout of malaria, I was in the hospital for just over a week, and it probably lost 5 or 6 pounds. I mean, you just sweat it off. You just, it's just what it is. Mm-hmm. But
now, could they control it after that? Could they give you any treatment for it?
After that, once it's in your body, it's in your body. It stays in your body for the rest of your life, is what I've been told. And you can have reoccurrences at any time. And I've been very lucky, and I've only had one when I came home, but I had other incidents in Vietnam that affected me. So, because I had malaria 4 times, And the last time I had it, I had 2 different kinds of malaria at the same time. They evacuated me to Cameron Bay Hospital. I spent 21 days in the hospital and lost 20 pounds. So, you know, it's just one of those issues. You just, again, the enemy isn't the only thing that you got to get home. So.
Okay. Now, you were also doing some of your patrolling in the rice paddies. And did you do things differently in the rice paddies than in the plantation?
The problem with the rice paddies is you knew you had to walk on the rice paddy dikes or berms, whatever you want to call them. And you knew that the enemy was going to booby trap those. And to walk in the rice paddies, you're wet enough. I mean, typically, when I first got there, I wore socks in my boots, and like everybody else at the time, nobody told me anything different. And but your feet are wet so much that you get sores between the wrinkles. You know how when your skin gets wrinkly? Your feet were wrinkly so much that they develop sores between the wrinkles, and you can just start pulling the skin off. I mean, it's wet so much. So what I found that worked for me is I just didn't wear socks when I was moving through the, you know, most of the time during, and then I put the socks on at night. Then the water would run in the boots and drain out quicker. It wouldn't hold the moisture into your boots, and your feet got nasty. And that's just another one of those. You could be a casualty that way. Your feet get so bad that, or bamboo poisoning. Everything we were breaking brush was bamboo. Well, we had one of our guys that typically in the 1st Infantry Division we couldn't roll our sleeves up. They didn't want us to. Well, this guy rolled his sleeves up. Well, he had scratches from bamboo poisoning, and all of a sudden his arms just swelled up and they were just weeping of this pus from the bamboo poisoning. So just from the leaves of the bamboo tree. Each person is different, but like in the 1st Infantry Division, you had to wear a steel pot and you had to keep your sleeves down. Other units that I saw, they were wearing boonie caps, they'd roll their sleeves up. Things were different. I mean, it was just one of those the unit I was with.
Okay. Now, overall, then, the unit you were with initially, that company had pretty good morale and discipline and so forth.
Yeah, the whole time I was with the 1st Infantry Division was phenomenal. And this was the late 60s because we were looking at from October
69.
September 15th is when I got to Vietnam. So September 15th until into May, I was with the 1st Infantry Division, and they were a phenomenal unit. They had a great area. They knew what they're doing, and didn't cut corners. Never. We had an operation where they told us one time, like I said, you don't move at night. Enemy moves at night. We were scared of the night. We had an operation. We'd set up. We were all set, ready to go, and they called in we had orders to move 2 miles. And we said, you got to be, and it was dark. So what they did is they called in a C-130 gunship, Puff the Magic Dragon, whatever you want to call it. Well, it was popping illumination flares as the unit moved. Well, we had to move, like I said, about 2 miles. And it took us, took us over 2 hours, 2.5 hours to move the whole unit. And we just got ready to, and how we moved is we had a guy, I wouldn't have done it, we had a guy put a strobe light, tape it to the top of his weapon, and then he had to hold the weapon. So he had to stay in the center of the unit so the gunship knew where to fly. Nobody does dumb things, but that's what we had to do. So we get ready. We've got to the position. They want us to ambush, and we're just getting ready to call the gunship off station, and we took a green tracer into our perimeter. Well, green tracers, the enemies had green tracers. We had red tracers. We took a green tracer in. Well, the pilot had seen the green tracer too, or his crew or somebody on it, and said, I'll bed you down for the night. Well, the miniguns that they used were those electric miniguns, and they had 3 of them on this gunship. Well, typically there is a tracer, 4 rounds, and another tracer. Well, these guns put out 6,000 rounds a minute. Well, he made 2 revolutions around us and never let up. And all we had was these 3 red streaks coming into the ground. It was deafening. You had to cover your ears. The noise was so loud. But we didn't have any problems with the enemy that night because, man, it was the best thing that ever happened. That you knew that you were going to be safe that night because They knew that we were set up. We were able to set up. We went out the next morning. It looked like somebody had taken and just shredded the jungle like a donut around us. And that was impressive. That was thoroughly impressive.
Now, when you were doing these patrols with the 1st Division, did you ever run into any kind of significant amount of opposition? Did you get into big firefights?
Oh, yeah. We got pinned down one time, and the unit was moving in a forward motion. Enemy had like a horseshoe shape. They would pin us in pretty good. And this was another one of those. We knew we were in trouble. We knew we needed help. So we called in an F4 for support. Well, the F4 has 50 caliber machine guns with huge round. And so basically, the pilot was on station. He said, hey, pop smoke to show us where the front of the line is. We popped smoke, so he did a couple of revolutions and he could see where we were located. So he made himself a mental picture of where we were. And then he said, okay, pop smoke where you want me to bring in the rounds. So somebody threw a smoke grenade way into where the enemy was. Well, the problem we had is the only way he could get in, we were in an area where he had to come over our heads to get the enemy. Well, that's not the right way to do it. You should come in from the side, but he couldn't do that. So we popped the smoke, and he came in, and all we could hear on his radio, because I'm monitoring the radio, is, oh, shit. Well, he brought in the rounds too soon. Not to the level where anybody got hurt, but somebody could have got hurt. And he made his sweep in, and he annihilated the enemy, literally. I mean, I don't care what you say. He did what he was supposed to do, and now we weren't pinned down. We were able to move out of there. The shells are coming out of those guns so fast that I had a shell casing hit me on the arm, and it burned right through instantly, and just the 3rd degree burns instantly right on there. I couldn't fling it off because it just stuck. But I knew that, hey guys, those guys out there had the other end of that round going at them. And so it was one of those issues that you say, hey, I like what we got working with these F4 jets and this and that and the other thing. But we were able to move out of there without, and then get into a better position where we could take the enemy, and we moved them out. But they had set up on us, and we walked into it. It was one of those things that nobody was wounded or killed, but we had guys go wounded. Nobody got anything from the F4, but we had gotten some wounded from the enemy when they blew the ambush on us. I got that shell round. You know, the medic wanted to put me in for a Purple Heart. I said, don't even go there. Don't even go there, guys. Come on. You know.
Now, when you ran into them, were they mostly just using small arms?
Yeah. Most of the stuff we hit was RPG, rocket launchers, or AK-47s. Because with the 1st Infantry Division, the majority of the units we hit were VC. And a lot of times the VC had one weapon for 3 guys. They didn't all have weapons. The NVA, now that's a different story. The NVA were just as well equipped as we were. They had all the same, every man carried a weapon. VC didn't do that. I mean, they might have one weapon for every 3 or one weapon for every 2 guys. One guy falls, guy picks it up and goes. But they can still do a lot of damage, a lot of harassment, a lot of this, a lot of that. I mean, you know, it's one of those things that what they used to do was we'd be moving, they would fire on us, we'd have to sit down, you know, and then that would slow us up, and then we'd get up and move again, and then they'd fire on us again, and just harassment, and that's what we knew they were doing. They knew that was slowing us down from our goal, and that's what they did.
Okay. Now, you're with the 1st Division for sort of over half of your year in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Now, over the course of that time, how much turnover was there in the company and the platoon?
Typically, when I got there, you'd lose 2 or 3 guys, let's say, every week or every other week, whether back to the hospital or their time was up, because we weren't like everybody didn't go over at one time.
Right.
I flew in, so there was always somebody leaving and there was always somebody coming in at all times. I mean, it just seemed like there was always a new man and there was always somebody getting ready to be, as we call them, short.
Okay. Now, did your officers also rotate out?
The officers only had to have a 6-month tour. See, they weren't a 1-year tour, so yeah, they were in and out quite often. And that's why a lot of times the guys in the unit and the sergeants were a lot better to know what was going on than this new officer that came in every 6 months. I mean, there were officers that were doing stupid things because the OCS had trained them one way, but it wasn't the way the jungle should, allow them to be. And so a lot of times, the first sergeants, shoot, they were the runs. The sergeant, the platoon sergeant, he was running the damn place. Trust me, it wasn't the lieutenant a lot of times, because the lieutenant was normally, if he was a new guy, he didn't know what was going on. He'd have to go to his sergeant and say, what do we do here? What are we going to do here?
And is that what the smart ones did?
Oh, yeah, smart ones did that. The dumb ones thought, they came over with that I'm better than the rest of them, and they're the ones that always go home in the bag, or because that isn't the way it is. You got to learn from the guys that have been there, the guys on the ground.
Okay, and I guess you weren't taking a whole lot of casualties. So did the replacement system basically work for you?
Yeah.
You come in individually, you get oriented, the experienced guys know what they're doing?
Typically, like I said, somebody would take you under his wing, try to help you get through that first week, first month, whatever, and so that you could start counting those days down, and it worked well. I was the type of thing, that it worked for me, and I wanted to make it work for the next person that came into me, and so, but it was, we worked in, and we were hitting a lot of, we started to hit a lot of base camps. And what a base camp is just a whole bunker complex. And we started to hit a lot of those. And so what they did is they wanted somebody to be trained on the flamethrower. So they took me and said, hey, we want you to be trained on the flamethrower. Oh, great, wonderful, just what I want to do. So they took me in the rear, gave me a flamethrower, and said, okay. Well, when the training officer said, he said, now look, he says, you have the first lever shoots the foam out there, and then the back lever is the igniter, and that ignites it. He says, now, it's got a kick, so you got to lean into it. Well, I'd been in country a couple of months, and I thought I was a badass. I mean, what is he talking about? I can do this. Well, when I fired that doggone thing on the range for the first time, it went up on a 45-degree angle and burned all the hair off my arms. And I thought, well, I sure leaned into it like he said. I didn't. But what they did then is every time we'd hit a bunker complex, if it was a smaller one, somebody would throw hand grenades in it, and then I would torch it with the flamethrower before somebody would go in the bunker. And I didn't want to go in the bunker, but I would do that. So it was one of those things that I like what we had, the flamethrower and always that. And we had one of them where we were moving into an area. We walked into a battalion-sized base camp. It was a huge base camp. One of the biggest base camps I'd ever found in the area of operation that we were in. We backed off. We called in a B-52 bomb strike. We said, let's do this one up right. And they brought in, 100,000-pounders on 2 different runs. So basically the bomber would drop 200,000-pound rounds. So we thought, okay, this is going to be good. We backed off about, I'm going to guess, 3/4 of a mile. Now, our artillery FO said, we're way too close. He said, I want you guys to get down on your belly. He said, I want your pack on your back. He said, I want your helmet on your head, and get behind something that won't move. Tree, whatever you can find. I got behind this 6-foot anthill, and I thought, cool, no problem. Well, when that bomber made its, I was on the radio, so I could hear the bomber say bombs away. When the ground started to shake, the vibration from those first bombs were just unbelievable. It just bounced. And when they stopped, I was about 20 feet from the anthill. I bounced across the ground with a 50-pound pack on my back, and this cloud of dust had just come over me and covered us. The bomber made a second run and did the same thing. We said, might as well get behind the anthill. What can you do? And the same thing. But when we went in to check that area, we walked into craters that were 50 feet across, 20 feet deep, and were already filled up with water, and there wasn't nothing. It looked like the surface of the moon. Not triple canopy jungle. I mean, it just shredded it. And to me, there again, I'm glad I'm on the U.S. side when they got bombers like that. That was really cool. I mean,
now, when you would run into these base camps, would they be mostly not occupied?
Oh no, you'd normally, if we were doing our thing right, which we did a lot of, we moved in. We could smell the rice cooking, so we knew they were there. If they stayed to fight, fine. But a lot of times they'd go out the back end, and then all we would do is blow up all the bunkers, seize the rice or whatever and try to, get rid of anything we could. Other times, we found caches of weapons and ammo in those bunkers. We would just take them and have them flown back to the base camp. So,
all right. Now, at a certain point into your tour, you switch units.
Well, it wasn't one of them that I wanted to switch units. What happened is the 1st Infantry Division was one of the first units in 1970 that Nixon said, "Oh, I'm going to bring some people home." Well, they brought the flag and a few people home, but the 1st Infantry Division was one of the units they pulled out because it had been there the longest. And because I had 6 months left in country, most tours of duty were 12 months. I got almost 13 months, but we'll talk about that. So I had been with the 1st Infantry Division about 7 months, and now I only had 6 months left. So I was transferred to the 23rd Infantry Division, or the Americal. Now, I went to their base unit, and the unit was already in the field. So they said, "Well, we're going to fly you out to where the unit's working." And I said, "Okay, fine, that's not a problem." I'd been in country 7 months. I was a seasoned infantry veteran. I knew what I was doing. I didn't. Flew into where they were at. The minute I get off the chopper, everybody, all these guys are yelling, "New meat, new meat." Well, they always thought, they thought you were a new guy just coming in from the States. Well, the sergeant there, he knew better, and he says, "Guys, he's got more time in country than any one of us." What happened, within about a month, I was made sergeant, which means now I'm in charge of a bunch. But the problem with the Americal Division, they walked down a hard trail, single file, all the men, right down that trail. And they were walking into booby traps every day, every day. I mean, I couldn't understand why they would pull out a unit that is such a great unit, that had their shit in order, to throw in a unit that is so bad. So I got there and I said, once I made sergeant, I said, "Guys, we're doing this wrong. We ought to be setting up our own booby traps." So then I started training guys to set up booby traps. We started doing that, so we weren't walking into them all the time. But as a division, they were terrible. We walked up the side of, before we even started to set up the booby traps, one of the second or third missions that I was on, we'd been working. Americal was up in the Central Highlands, and most of the op was in mountainous areas and that, but there were some rice paddies. Well, we'd been working in a lower lands, and they wanted us to move up to the top of this mountain, and then they were going to take us off the top of the mountain and take us back to base camp for a 3-day stand down. Well, going up the mountain, we hit 2 booby traps. 3 guys were wounded, and so when we got to the top of the mountain, we pretty much knew that everything up there, we better be careful, because whether it's in the trail or the bushes, you better be careful, because it's going to be booby trapped. We set up a perimeter where we set up guys around the perimeter. We didn't have to dig foxholes because we knew we weren't going to stay. They were just going to bring in choppers and take us off, but they put up guards around the outside of this mountain. So now you got 65 guys. I had been in the middle of the unit, and we had set up the mortar platoon, had set their mortars, and some guy had an M79 grenade vest that had probably 25 hand grenades, or grenades that he shoots from his little gun on the vest, very close to where my pack was setting. Well, I had been sitting in my pack reading some leathers and just, and my squad was in the guard position. Choppers were coming in within, let's say, an hour. One of my guys come up to me and said, "Ron, I'd like to read my letters from home, and I'd like to have a cigarette," because you couldn't have a cigarette on the outside. So I said, "Fine." I says, "I'll go to the bunker." I no sooner got over the crest of the ridge when the whole mountain blew up. And when that happened, we had 14 killed and 32 wounded off one booby trap. It was the largest booby trap that was ever tripped in Vietnam at the time. What had happened is some guy had walked through one of the bushes that he shouldn't have, and they had booby trapped one of our artillery rounds, and it was in one of the bushes. Well, the bush was very close to our mortar platoon, all the mortars and this grenade vest. Well, when it went off as one big explosion. It wasn't so when the dust cleared, I came up to where my pack was, and the man was sitting on the pack, had taken a piece of shrapnel right straight through him, and because there were so many wounded in that, he bled to death in his pack. Now, this guy had just showed me his girlfriend's picture. He had just, said, hey, I want to read my letters and write a letter, but I want to have a cigarette. I said, fine. Those are the things that that this should have never happened. Now, they took 15 of us off the top of that mountain, and they put us in an area in the center of the base camp that had, I would guess, 15-foot high chain link fence around these 3 or 4 barracks. They put the 15 of us in there. They said, we're going to bring beer in there. We're just going to, because they knew that we all had some major problems because what we had just seen, and so they brought in, they gave us meals, they had beer, we just didn't have to do anything. Well, what they were doing is they took 5 or 10 men from each other unit in the battalion, brought them into that area, and then they brought us back up to company strength, and then we became another company going back out in the field. Well, again, by this time I was a sergeant. I'd been made sergeant then, and they said, okay. So now I was starting to train guys, set up the booby traps, and do this and that and the other thing, and it was the unit became a better unit, but it still would never match up to what I had come from. And they did things differently, and it was just it wasn't an exciting time for me.
Did that unit have sort of morale or discipline issues that were different from the first?
A lot of guys shamming, as we would call it, where they'd, I don't feel good, sick call and this and that, and a lot of guys smoking dope and smoking. I mean, the first night on the field, I literally wanted to break my weapon over the head of a guy because he was supposed to be on guard duty, and he had been smoking pot and he fell asleep. And I said, guys, you just don't do that. You just don't do that. But that's the first time I went out as a squad leader. I said to the guy, I said, look, you're going to carry extra flares, you're going to carry this, you're going to carry that, and I want you to carry an extra battery. So, because I said, you got to be in communication at all times, because if you get ambushed, you need good communication. So we're on our 3 or 4 or 5 days out in a mission, and we get fired upon. And I want to get good at, I want to be able to call artillery and bring it in to where it's supposed to be. So I want to put a new battery in. I asked this guy for the new battery. He said, oh, I threw that out a couple of days ago. He said it was too heavy. Now, that's when you say to this guy, I don't want you in my platoon again, or my squad, or whatever. I don't want you in this field. So a lot of that kind of stuff started to happen, where these guys were they wanted to get out of the field. They didn't want to be part of what was going on. So it was not a unit where, when you got there, you were proud to be in that unit. All these guys wanted to get to the rear. I got a cut. I'm going to, get a medical, and that was just wrong. And I could see that, because I had come from a unit that everybody wanted to be there and wanted to help get the other guy home. In this unit, they didn't care. And I think that had a lot to do with the amount of drugs later on in the war that were coming on, and I happened to be there at the time when it was just starting to really take off. And I never smoked a day in my life. I could smell it from a mile away. I knew when they were doing it in the bunker. I'd get them in the next morning, and I'd say, guys, it's not what you're supposed to be doing. And I'll tell the lieutenant, or I'll tell the captain, but I says, I'm going to tell them if you keep it up. I said, you do that when you're in the rear. You don't do it in the field. And that was a real struggle, when it wasn't that you were just fighting the enemy. Now you got to fight the guys that are in your unit that are supposed to be there to help you,
Now, did you eventually establish a certain amount of rapport or credibility?
You did, but you could never, I never felt comfortable with the unit. I don't know if it was the training. I don't know if it's just the way that the lackadaisical way they were. There's no way I could ever feel totally comfortable with that. I got comfortable with a few, and that was what I liked. But they were a strange bunch. I mean, it was a whole mentality of the whole unit. And maybe it was because of that the chain of command. Maybe it was because, I just don't know. I never figured out why that unit was such a bad unit. And like I said, when that bomb went off, I was dumbfounded. I was devastated because at that point in time, my life had changed because it was, yeah, I had been working the whole 9 months at this time to stay alive, but now I said, man, I got to get out of this place. This place is going to get me if I don't. And I was lucky. I trained a 5-man squad to setting up ambushes and setting up booby traps, and they got to be really good because after 10 months in country, 10 months of fighting them, I got a job as a battalion draftsman Jeep driver for a major. And within a week of me getting that job, my 5-man squad got credit for 13 kills on an ambush and booby traps. So I know that I did something right. And but as the battalion Jeep, draftsman and Jeep driver for this major, basically we had a bunker on top of our fire support base that was big chain link fence around it, and that was his headquarters. And there was a huge map of our area of operation, and it was covered in plastic. And I had 5 different colored grease pencils that I used, and I had to plot each unit where they were. I had to plot temperatures, kills, anything that major might have to tell a general when he come up for a briefing. So that was my job, is every day keeping up with that. And then across from this was my bunker that I lived in. Well, one of the first nights in the bunker, now I've got this great job. I got hot meals every day, clean uniform every day. I'm not dodging bullets and all that. And so I'm sleeping on my cot in this bunker. And the bunker's a pretty nice bunker because it had been there for a few years, and the guys had really made it nice. And I fell asleep. And normally I would sleep on my stomach. And so I fell asleep that night. And I had a sensation that there was something wet on my finger. And I thought, geez. And I woke up, and I saw this rat taken off. And it had been licking, And the rat was a pretty good sized rat. I mean, it was a good sized rat. So I thought, boy. So from that point on, whenever I was in my bunker, I slept on my back, and I had my arms crossed over. I said, I ain't going to let that happen again. But as a Jeep driver, I had to drive the major from fire base to fire base where he would give briefings or he would get briefings as a major for the unit. And on one of these incidents, we were going in between 2 mountain ridges. The road went right in the middle of them. And all we heard was this AK-47 open up on us, and it went crack, 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 crack. I mean, it was just, you could hear it. And this major said to me, kick in the ass, Dykstra. And man, I nailed that Jeep, and away we went. We knew the rounds were close, and he did too. And he said, when we got back to our base camp, he said, okay, he said, I want you to check the Jeep over. He says, I know those rounds were close. Well, the Jeep I drove, originally they had a name on the front of it. Well, the kids were telling the VC what the name was, and they were shooting that because I knew there was a major in there. So we had a lot. When I got there, they'd already started painting over names because they knew that was a bad thing to do. Behind the seats on the Jeep was a radio, and the radio was it was a good-sized radio. The bottom of the antenna was probably a 2.5 or 3 inch diameter antenna, and the antenna was probably 12 foot tall, and it had one on each side. So I get back to the base camp, and I check the Jeep over, and the antenna on my side has taken a round right through the base. Now that antenna is no more than 2 feet behind me. Now I know that if that VC had led, as we call it, led you further, but he didn't lead us right for the speed of the vehicle. So he opened up on us at the antenna instead of opening up on us at the driver. That's how close that one was. And you say, my God. My Jeep, because I was short, I had 10 months in country, and I had most guys put sandbags behind the seat, down the center, and 1 sandbag under your feet. Well, I had double of everything. My Jeep squatted. It was just, because I just didn't want anything to come up from the bottom. And so that was another one of those close incidents. So again, I know that there was a reason that I was able to accomplish my task and come home safely.
Now, while you were assigned to that major and you're not living on a base camp, now, do they have Vietnamese civilians working on a base camp?
Yeah, they have the civilians would do clean. A lot of them they use them for cleaning, and they would some of them they'd even use them for doing the dishes and cleaning, so that you didn't have to pull KP and things like that. But they were around there all the time, and the civilians, you just didn't trust them. When I was driving Jeep, we had somebody in our battalion where a little kid had taken a hand grenade. He wrapped the hand grenade with rubber bands really, really tight, and he pulled a pin, and he opened the gas cap on a Jeep, and he shoved it in the gas can, and then he shut the gas cap. Well, it took a while, but the gas ate away that rubber band and blew the Jeep sky high. Now, this was an 8 or 9, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid that did this. We had kids that we found with these little homemade weapons. What they were doing, they would take a block of wood, they would take an M14, which was our sniper round, they would take an M14 and they'd rubber band that on top of this block of wood. They'd cut off the back of that M14, okay? Now, our M16 round will fit right inside that. They would put a smoke grenade trigger on the back of it, and all they would do is pull back and they'd pop. And these little kids were using them as little guns. You just didn't know. You didn't know who was friendly and who was foe.
Yeah. Now, would they get all the Vietnamese off the base at night, or did
Yeah,
some of them,
they would have to leave. They would normally leave about an hour. They'd start to leave about an hour before it got dark, because they would have to be in their homes.
Right.
And then anything that moved was free game. Anything that moved, we could shoot on it. Okay. And that's what it was.
And was there a town or a village in the area close by?
Yeah. Okay. Typically, when you got a fire support base, you'd have a couple of villages, one on each side of it, or something like that, because, that's just the way it was set up. That's just the way it was. And from every one of my incidents, that's how it was set up. So.
And then would the men go into the villages during the day, or that kind of thing?
During the day, they could. If they were off, they could go in the villages and they could buy souvenirs. I mean, I had a portrait done of me by this Vietnamese artist, and the guy was a phenomenal artist. I had a portrait done, 11 by 14, and gorgeous portrait. Something I'll always remember, just because you got that young face in that portrait, a young innocent face in that portrait. But you could do that. You could buy souvenirs. I bought my photo album from there. There were just any odds and ends that you could do.
Now, were there issues with crime or prostitution or things like that? There?
Oh yeah. But I see, again, I hear about it and I see it in movies, but I never was in the big cities. I never saw that because.
But it wasn't going on in those villages necessarily.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
But from my perspective, I was always in the jungle or something. But yeah, a lot of times if you were pulling road security on Highway 1, the big red one, it was main highway that run through Vietnam, north to south. If you were pulling road security, and a lot of guys would do that on these amphibious type of vehicle, or track vehicle,
right.
And basically a track vehicle would pull off the shoulder, and the infantry would set a position out there. Typically, the prostitutes would come up on a little Honda 50s. They'd have somebody driving a Honda 50, and they'd get off the back, and they'd go service the guys out in the bush or in the tank. And that's just the way it was. Just the way it was.
Now, one of the standard issues or things that gets brought up about Vietnam is sort of racial issues. Did you see much tension?
Yeah. It would. Well, I had some experiences that I had, and I hate to use the term, but I'm going to use it the way I used to use it, is I had some guys, black guys in my unit that were the worst guys. I just couldn't get them out of the unit fast enough. And I had other guys in my unit, black guys in my unit, that I would depend my life on. But the percentage of those that you could depend your life on, in my experience, was pretty small. Most of them were in the rear smoking dope, heroin, whatever. That's all I ever saw. I didn't, and they always used them but that's what I saw. The ones in the field, we had them, there's no doubt about it. We had some great ones, wonderful ones. But a lot of them like the guy that threw the battery away, he was black. Those are the type of things that can get people killed, and I'm not going to put up for that, and I didn't want to. But if you're forced to have them in your unit, there's nothing you can do about it. You got to make the best you can. But the problem is, you find them sleeping on guard. You find them doing those kind of things, and you say, this is going to get somebody killed. So yeah, it was, but I saw more in the rear, blacks in the rear, that was drugs and drugs and drugs and drugs, and it was, that's just what it was. Maybe I was blinded to the rest of it. But.
And was that kind of situation worse in the Americal than it was in the 1st Division?
Yeah. Saw it in the 1st Infantry Division, but it was worse in Americal. I mean, one of the guys in the Americal, they did an article in Time magazine, like 70, mid 70, and here he is standing there in front of one of these places smoking it, and he was with me in the unit. He's in the Time magazine. So yeah, I remember that one well. I remember that well and what that was. But from the, again, I spent virtually 10 months in the jungle, and then I spent 2 months as a Jeep driver for a major with a nice bunker. I had my own music and I did my own thing, and I didn't get involved with the other. It happened, and it happened in the bunker, but I didn't have part of that. I just stayed away from it. Again, I didn't come from Detroit, Chicago, where they were doing it before they got there, and they were going to do it when they got back. Grandville didn't do that. It just didn't happen in the Grandville area.
Yeah. Well, the statistics that I've seen are essentially that you had about the same rate of drug use at home as you had in Vietnam.
Yeah, but it's just that it was so evident there that here it was, you didn't notice it as much, but there, little kids were selling you the damn dope for nothing. I mean, it didn't cost you nothing. So when we came in from the field, and this is the honest to God truth, even in the 1st Infantry Division, when we came in from the field, there would be, let's say, 10 or 12 of us in the back of a deuce and a half. They would get 3 or 4 joints going around the back of the deuce and a half. As we're going in, these guys were taking the edge off, because now they said they could take the edge off. Yeah. And they would pass it around, and anybody could take a hit off it going into the base camp. And that's just the way it was. And you could do that, and you could do that for 2 days or 3 days. You could drink beer if you wanted to do that for 2 or 3 days. But that's all, because you had to be right back in that, your senses had to be so sharp from that point on afterwards. So.
Now, over the course of your year there, did you get R&R at any point or any leave time?
Yeah, I took R&R in Hawaii, and it was again, I had just a little over 9 months. I took a 7-day R&R in Hawaii. Had a great time. The weather was wonderful, but I knew what I was going back to. I hadn't gotten my rear job yet as the driver for the major, so I knew I was going back in the field, and so you try to live and do as much as you can in 7 days in Hawaii, knowing that may be the last 7 days of that you're going to see that type of thing. You may never come home. So you spend a lot of money, cost you a fortune, trust me, cost you, because you're, as an infantry guy, combat pay, the whole shooting match was $287 a month. Now you think about who wants to put their life on the line every day for $287 a month. I don't think so. So to go to Hawaii cost you a fortune. Cost you, $1,000 between the hotel and the flight and all the rest, getting somebody there. And, it didn't cost you to get there, but it cost somebody else to get there. So all that, it was an expensive thing, but it was worthwhile. It rejuvenated, made sure that you had a good idea what you were fighting for, what you wanted to go home to, and that's what it was all about. So I had a great 7 days, came back, and within literally a month, I got my job as a Jeep driver.
Okay.
So.
Now, you mentioned that you were supposed to be there for 12 months, and you wound up being there closer to 13. How did that work?
What happened is I had, about the time I got my job in the rear, well, a little before that, again, I found out that the Army was offering a 5-month job if you came back from Vietnam with less than 150 days on your tour. So if I extended 21 days, I'd come back and land in Seattle with 149 days left in country, in my tour of duty. So I thought, I don't want to be, I knew what I was going to be doing. I knew that they were going to take me to Fort Polk or Fort Knox, and they were going to want me to yell and scream at these young 18 and 19-year-old kids, and I knew where they were going, and I didn't want to do that. I knew I was good. I knew I could help them, but I just didn't want to do that. So I extended for 21 days. And I was, in the big picture, I was lucky. I didn't realize it, but I was lucky. I had 12 months in country, and I came down with malaria for the 4th time. The 4th time, I had 2 different malarias at the same time. I went to Cameron Bay, and I lost 20 pounds or 21 pounds in 20 days. In the hospital, they wanted to send me to Tokyo and then send me home. But I knew that if I went to Tokyo, I'd spend a month in Tokyo, and then they'd send me to a hospital in the States, and I'd spend a month there, and by then I'd have been home a long time ago. So I called the major, and I'd been in the hospital at this time about 17 days, and I called the major and I said, "Guy, you got to get me out of here. They're going to send me to Tokyo, which means, I've only got 10 days left in my tour. Why don't you just see if you can get the papers and have them send me back to the company area?" The major did. I was sent back to the company area. When I got back, I had 7 days left in country. The guys in the bunker wanted to celebrate that I had come back, and they knew I was leaving. So they mixed me up rum and Coke in a glass about this big. Now, I was not a drinker until I came back from Vietnam. There I wasn't. I could smell it that far away. Now, I drank 2 of those. Now, when I woke up, I had 5 days left in country. Now, I'd lost 2 days of my life, but I knew that, and the major came down and said, "Dykstra, good to see you up and around." He said, "We thought we lost you there." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I don't want you to leave this bunker." He said, "I'll have all the meals brought in to you." He said, "And you start getting your paperwork in order so you can get out of here." He says, "And I'll have my Jeep take you to the airstrip and get you home safe." And I said, "Okay, fine." Well, the major was cool in the bigger picture, and how I knew that from the time I worked with him. He was an enlisted man that had been in the Army for 7, 8, 9 years and decided that, hey, I'm going to make this a career. He went to OCS, so he'd been down with the grunts. Right. He'd been down with the PFCs and the rest of it. He knew it. So he was a cool major because he wasn't one of these majors that had their nose in the air. He was a cool guy. And I liked that for him, and he treated me great. So it took me more time than I thought to get my papers and get everything. You got to get everything in order. You got to get your everything. You got to have your uniform halfway decent. You got to this, that, and the other thing. Got to have paper. Got to have a haircut. You got to do all those things. Your companies, they're going to control some of it. They don't want you looking like a rag bag leaving. They don't want that. Well, they aren't going to let you have it. So you did all those things. Well, the problem I had was the last 2 or 3 days before I was supposed to leave country, the monsoon rains started again. Because I'd gone through the monsoons in the first interview, and now I'm going through the monsoons at the end of this tour, and terrible. Everything is socked in. Nothing can fly. No choppers can fly. Well, the only way I was getting from my fire support base to Cameron Bay or where I was going was by chopper or C-130. Well, nothing was flying. So they decided that there were so many of us that had to get out of there that they put us in a deuce and a half, and they sandbagged the deuce and a half. They reissued us weapons. They had a gunship, Cobra gunship, go over it, and they took this truck, and we trucked all the way to Cameron Bay because they had to get us out of there, which was wonderful. So we get to Cameron Bay, we get on that plane, and that's the best thing that's ever happened to you in your life is when you're leaving. You hate to say it, but you've left all these other people. I was lucky enough to leave some guys that knew what they were doing, and they all came home safe, and like they got credit for these kills, and they were great guys. So I land in Seattle. Now in Seattle, they're backed up because nobody could fly out of Vietnam for 2 or 3 days. So now they've set themselves a goal to get everybody out in 1 day. Now, you get into Seattle, they have got to make sure your papers are in order. You got to get orders cut to whether you're going to get restationed to another unit in the States. Haircuts, they do a physical. They have to fit you in dress greens, fitted with all the ribbons and badges and all the bells and whistles on it, and then you can go. Well, by the time they got done sending us to the Seattle-Tacoma airport for our flight home, it was late. So I was able to make the last flight to Chicago but I was going to miss the last flight to Grand Rapids. So in Seattle, I called my parents and I said, here's what's happening. I'm home. I'm getting ready to fly out of Seattle, but I'm going to have to spend the first night in Chicago in the airport because I can't get that first flight to Grand Rapids. I said, I'll see you the next morning. And they said, fine. Well, I didn't realize at the time that my aunt, or my grandmother was visiting my aunt in Valparaiso, 45 minutes from the airport. Well, I got two little cousins that I had been sending illumination parachutes, hand grenade pins. I'd been sending them for the whole time I was over there. Every letter I would send my aunt. My uncle was a professor at Valparaiso, so he's the one that I used to tell him what the war was about and what was happening, the real truth of what I was seeing in the jungle and what he was hearing or what was happening. Mm-hmm. So I was always sending my cousin, these little kids, I was always sending them things in the letters. So I get off the airplane expecting just to walk to my gate and then I was going to sleep in there. And here's my two little cousins holding up this little sign, welcome home, Ron. And I thought, holy mackerel. And it was about 10:30ish when I got there. Now these kids at the time were probably, I'm going to guess 6 and 8. They were just little kids. And so I sat there and we all cried joy, and we sat there and we talked and talked and talked. And it was almost 2 in the morning, and I said to my aunt and my grandmother, I says, you got to get the little kids home. I says, another 4 or 5 hours, I says, I'm going to be getting on a plane. You go, do your thing. And so they left, and then I sat in the airport with this, just excited because now I got on the plane the next morning at 7:30 in the morning, landed in Grand Rapids because there's that hour difference. I landed about 9:30 in the Grand Rapids and got off, and the whole family was there, and hadn't driven a car in 13 months, and said, hey, I want to drive home. And they said, fine. So I drive home, and I'm about a half a mile from home, and I get off the highway, and I make a left-hand turn, and I get pulled over by a Grand Rapids cop. Now, when I left, I could legally make a left-hand turn going up the hill, Michigan Street Hill. I could make a left going up that hill. Well, when I was gone, they had made that was an illegal turn. Now, this was a young cop, and he pulled me over, and he could see I'm still in my uniform. And I tried to explain that to him, that I says, look, this was a legal turn. I'm sorry. I've just got back a half hour ago from Vietnam, and didn't care. Wrote me a ticket. He said, if you don't agree with it, he said, you can fight it. Now, this is my first day home, And so I thought, this isn't the way it's going to end. So 3 or 4 weeks later, I went to court, and judge asked me to explain why I was there. And I says, I got this ticket for making an illegal left turn. And I says, and I explained the story that I said, it was legal. The guy pulled me over. I tried to explain to him that I'm in my uniform, and I just got back from Vietnam, and this judge just went ballistic on this officer. And he said to the officer, he said, I want to see you in the chambers after the court. But he said, Mr. Dykstra, and he said, I want to thank you, and he said, I feel so sorry that this has happened to you, and I want to thank you for your service to our country and for our freedom and this, yada, yada, yada. And he said, I don't know what else to say to you. And he said, court dismissed. Bingo. And I thought, now the war's over finally, But it wasn't an easy thing from day one till the last day. It was a struggle the whole, in my opinion, for mine, it was a struggle for 19 months. Mm-hmm. And 13 of it happened to be in Vietnam. But it was a long road. And when I came home, I was a different person. Like I said, I have an identical twin brother that literally, the first time I was medevaced out of the field, my twin brother was crying in the basement. My mother came down and said, what's wrong? And my twin brother said, something is wrong with Ron. Well, they got a call from the Red Cross that said I had been medevaced out. Mm-hmm. Nothing major, but they got the call. Now, I'm in the field one day, and my leg is just killing me. And the medic's saying, what'd you do? How'd you hurt your? I said, I don't know. It's just driving me crazy. Well, I find out from a letter that my twin brother had gotten 3rd-degree burns from a grease fire on his leg. Now, this is weird stuff. I'm in Seattle Airport. I buy a pair of sunglasses, and I think, God, these are great. I get off the plane in Grand Rapids. He's got the exact same pair of glasses on. That's it. So I know that him and I are identical. But from that point on, we have not been identical. Mm-hmm. Before that, we were. Every thought. When I start to say something, he's going to say the same thing. But it didn't happen after that. Mm-hmm. His life went one way and mine went the other. And it's got to do with, it may not have to do with the military, but it had to do with Vietnam. I guarantee that it changed my life.
How would you characterize that change?
I had to go to the faucet and turn on a glass of water, to flush a toilet. I mean, I had a third world poverty. I just loved what I had and what was here for me. It was like I respected everything about the U.S. Grandville, stupid little I respect, because it was a lot better than where I had been and what I had seen. I mean, I'll tell you, it was. So from my perspective, yeah, it was totally. And that's, I think, what changed me. You know, it wasn't the war as much as what I appreciated and what simpler things in life that mean more to me than they did before I went. You took them for granted.
All right. How easy or hard was the readjustment to civilian life?
It was, for me at first it was a little difficult. Not a lot, but it was a little difficult. My language was terrible. Everything I said was a swear word. I mean, I had to watch what I said. Because I came back and was living at home even at that point. It was a strange thing. I had an incident where my roommate in college at Ferris, he was my roommate for 2 years, lived in Detroit. I'd been home about a couple of weeks, and I made arrangements to go visit him. And I decided to take the bus because I didn't want to drive yet, long trip. And so I took the Greyhound to Detroit. His fiancée picked me up. And him and I were close for 2 years, really close. I wrote him letters while I was in Vietnam, too. And so we went out to celebrate that first night back with him. And we went to this little bar. And we brought his fiancée with us because we wanted to designate a driver. And all she was drinking was orange drink. And him and I were drinking pitchers of beer. And we both just had a great time because I was telling him the stories and just enjoying life and being back and being with him and seeing him again. And so we go out to the parking lot, and the only thing we can think is that the bar had called because there was a policeman across the street. We didn't notice it when we got in our car, but it was across the street and watched us leave the bar. I was sitting in the front seat, and my roommate was in the back seat, and his fiancée was driving. We get to the first red light, and the cop pulls up next to us and says, "I want you to pull over when the light turns green, and he's pointing right at me, you stay in the car." And I'm saying, what did I do? I know I'm drunk, but I still... So we pull over. He comes up to the car, and he pulls the door open, and he yanks me up, and he takes me out 15, 20 feet out in this middle of this field. And young cop. There's a young and an older cop. The young cop does it, and he's yelling and screaming and yup. And my roommate tries to get out of the car, and he goes, "You stay in that car." Well, the older cop finally come over, and I'm saying, "Yes, sir, no, sir. I don't understand why you pulled us over." I said, "I just got back from Vietnam not too long ago, and I just saw my roommate for the first time in a long time. We brought his wife along, or fiancée along, so she could drive. Well, he thought I gave him an obscene gesture when I got out of the bar. He thought I flipped him off. Well, I hadn't. And the older cop, and the younger cop is egging me on because he wants to throw me in jail. And the older cop finally says, fine. And he could see that I wasn't going to go there. I was still being very, yes, sir, no, sir. I didn't do that, sir. I don't understand it, sir. I'm that, and that's the way I was. And they finally let me go. But again, the adjustment, yeah, it was a little tougher. My best friend in Vietnam, the young guy that I trained 3 months before I left, he came back in about January or February, and I got back in October 7th, and he was going to get married to his high school sweetheart. So I'd gotten a letter from him, and I wrote him when he was there. So I went to his wedding, and it was so great to see him, just to see what had happened and how he had done and how the rest of the guys had done. But I lost touch with that young man. You always do. You always say you're going to, but you never stay in touch with him. But you finally say, hey, I'm home. He's home, you're home. You say it's over. But it's never over. I got married in '73, so just about 3 years after I got back. And I would have the nightmares, and my wife would find herself on the floor in the bedroom and not know why she had gotten there and not know anything about it, but that's just what it was. I used to have them a lot, don't have them anymore. But it was one of those things that back then, I never knew what was, everybody says, oh, the fireworks are going to set you off. I went for years and years and years and never had it. One time I had fireworks went off, I got a whiff of that and it sounded like artillery, and doggone it, if it won't, you just never know. But I've been, I've got a great family, and I made the best of what I could make. I tried to make myself a better person for what I had seen and the people that I had came in contact with, and the people that that were, like I said, the people that didn't make it back. I got involved with just wanting to make. I didn't want all veterans to be made out to be the homeless, down in their outs and beards and all this, and that going postal. I didn't want that, and I tried to do what I could do as a professional, and to put a best foot forward and say, they aren't all like that. Right. There are a lot of us that are, really part of this community, part of this whatever, and that's what's bought, in my opinion, to this day. And why I wanted to do this is just because of that, for my kids, for the future of these kids, and for anybody else. I enjoyed when like I told you earlier, I enjoyed when I was giving presentations to high school and college kids about the war, letting them know that, guys, it wasn't a war, but it was a war. And there are a lot of people, and here's how it affected these people, and here's what they went through, and here's how they went through it. And that to me meant a lot, because at the time, the books didn't have a lot about Vietnam, a paragraph, a page maybe.
At this point, you made kind of an outline for yourself. Why don't you check your notes there and
make sure.
See if you've
I've tried to cover everything, and it's one of those things that I'm going to keep this for me, just because of that, because I've never wrote it down before in my life, and to know this was coming, I said, man, I want to make sure I cover everything. I don't want to forget something that's an important part. In the hospital, every time you could sign up to make a MARS call. And a MARS call was basically from ham operator to ham operator to ham operator. And so the first time I was in the hospital, I was able to, in a letter, tell them, I'm going to be making a MARS call on this date at this time. So I make the MARS call. And what a MARS call is I'd have to say, hello, how's everybody doing? Over. And then they would know that they could speak, because somebody in 4 different locations throughout the United States would have to flip a switch and let the other person talk. And I had a grandmother at the time that had never driven a car. She was my favorite grandmother, lived in Grandville, the oldest house in Grandville, for her whole life. She was part of the church group and prayers and all that. Well, she couldn't be at the phone. So I sent a Panasonic tape player home. I had one, and I'd make tapes, and then a lot of times my younger brother, who's 10 years younger than me, he would set and he would tape the phone calls. So he could take the tape over to my grandmother, so my grandmother could listen to the tapes, and you know, it would cheer her up. You know how that goes. But the Mars call was a neat thing. You could do them in base camp too. You could call back, and if you could set up a time, but you had to get on a list, and then you'd have to be there, and they'd give you, let's say, 15 minutes to make a phone call home. I was made the radio operator for the lieutenant in the infantry with the 1st Infantry Division about a month and a half after I got to the unit. So I was still just new, but I was made the RTO, which means the radio operator, which was great. But that meant I had to carry an extra 25-pound radio on my back, had to carry smoke grenades extra, illumination flares, and you had to be on the first chopper into every LZ. And I got, every LZ, you didn't know if they were going to be a hot LZ or not, but you had, normally you could be on the 3rd lift, so it'd be a secure LZ, but being the radio operator, I had to be on the first lift of choppers going in every time. And
now, RTOs were often targets, weren't they?
Oh yeah, because they had that big antenna banging around. Not a good thing. I did it with passion. I called in this and I called in that, and I made sure when he told me, gave me up grid coordinates, I knew that I was given the right one, because I didn't want to call in artillery on our own zones, you know. This is an incident. I told you I had problems with animals. Well, the deer was one. But the other one I had is, I had a 5-man squad that we would, at the time, I was part of a 5-man squad. We'd set up an ambush position away from the company area, and we'd just set up. And it sounded like the whole NVA Army coming down the damn trail. I mean, it sounded. And I'm saying, and I had just, and I said, get ready, get ready. And I said, let's blow our claymores and fire. Well, just about the time we started firing our weapons after blowing the claymores, we could hear the squealing of pigs. And we'd blown a family of wild boars away. Mama, Papa, and 5 little ones. Just blew them. But now that we've blown our ambush, the enemy knows where we are. We can't reset up our ambush. So the whole night we had to stay awake the whole night, because we could. The next morning, the company, the captain and the lieutenants from the other, they come up there. They put the pig between a pole, carried the pig back to the LZ where they were going to get resupplied. The pigs went in the back, and everybody in the rear base camp had pig that. We didn't get it, but they had it. So, and one other time, set up in an ambush position in the foxhole. I had just come off guard, which means I was laying behind the foxhole, and all I could see was these green eyes in the jungle coming at me. And I didn't want to blow the ambush, and I said, all right, quiet. And all of a sudden, there was a black panther went right over my back. So you say, okay, animals and me didn't work real well, you know. And then we had 15 missions in a row with the 1st Infantry Division, where we had coming in from the rear. We had clean clothes and dry feet. We went into 15 LZs in a row where it was wet. The choppers couldn't set down. We had to jump out of the choppers. Our feet were wet instantly, you know, up to here or further. And you start out with wet feet again. And we had 15 of them in a row, that, because the ground over there is always wet. I mean, it just always wet. Had a time on the airstrip. We were going out. This one here is one of these that you don't ever want to hear about, but it happened. 2 guys, high school buddies, drafted the same time, went to basic together, went to AIT together, went to Vietnam together, and were assigned to the same unit. Best of friends. We'd been resupplied, sitting on the airstrip like we always do. We set on your backpack, just waiting for the choppers to come in. They're playing cowboys and Indians. And one of them shot the other one right through the heart, died instantly. The guy grabs his heart, he dies. The other guy literally went insane. He had just killed his best friend but the M16 became like a comb in your pocket. You took it for granted. It was there. It was loaded. It was always loaded. You didn't, and that's what happens. It was an accident. Accidental shootings and deaths happened a lot in Vietnam. Happened a lot. And I happened to have the opportunity to see one 10 feet away when that happened. Because I watched the guy grab his heart, and he just died. Died right there. You know, you just never know when your time is going to come. We came in for Christmas. We came in for Christmas on Christmas Eve. We were in for 3 or 4 days. We were lucky enough to come in. A lot of times they don't send your care packages out to the field with you. You open them when you get back to the base camp. My grandmother had sent a case of Jiffy Pop popcorns. Christmas Eve. So we'd had Christmas dinner at the mess hall. So Christmas Day, I gave everybody a Jiffy Pop. And that night, the company area smelled like a popcorn factory. And I thought, this is cool. This is so cool. Because I love popcorn. And it brought me back to, for almost a minute, I could say I'm in my living room having popcorn, you know. It just was a great thing. And my grandmother just did something so simple, but it meant so much to me, and I'm sure a lot of other people. I know I've covered most of it, and I just want to, there's so, we, with the Americal Division, I was up in the mountain areas, and we were up on top of a mountain, and down in the valley, we could see the VC, or the NVA moving around, so we knew they were moving. Well, we could see the South China Sea coastline from the top of our mountain. We'd heard that there was a destroyer off station, and so we called back to the rear. We said, "Hey, can you contact the destroyer and see if they would like to fire their guns to help us clear this position?" And they came back to us and said, "Yeah, the destroyers would love to do a fire on to test fire their guns." So we give them the grid coordinates, and we want them to basically annihilate that grid. Now, we could not see the destroyer, but when the destroyer fired its guns, we could see the flash. And I thought, oh, this is cool. And when that round went over top to go down in that valley, I swear to God, they were throwing a Volkswagen through the air. I mean, it was just, again, B-52s, destroyers, Puff the Magic Dragon. Guys, we had all the good stuff. There's no reason we monkeyed around for as long as we did, you know. When you see it used, and you see it used right, it's an impressive thing. It's an impressive thing. Yeah, that's that. I think from my perspective, I've covered everything that I in my notes I put down. Like I said.
Yes, one other thing that had kind of occurred to me, you were going to talk about sort of morale issues and that kind of stuff. The other kind of thing that comes up, especially late in the war, is the issue of fragging officers and that sort of stuff.
We had a bad incident, and it was with the unit, 1st Infantry Division. I got there within about a month to a month and a half after I got there. The first sergeant, that's all the guy did is sit in the rear, and he never came out in the field. He always had his clean and pressed clothes, and so we'd come in get off them deuce and a halves from a 10, 12, 14-day mission. He'd line us up in a formation, and he'd say, "I want all you guys to take a shower, get clean clothes, and I want you all to get a haircut." And he was just brutal about that. These guys, next mission, they come home dead. And so somebody fragged him. They rolled one underneath. Because again, these barracks that we were staying in were just raised off the ground 1.5 feet, wood floors, wood side with screens, and then and that's somebody just rolled a hand grenade underneath that, and it didn't kill him, but at least it wounded him enough where he went back to the States, and the guys didn't have to put up with it. Don't know who did it. Nobody cared. But we didn't need that kind of harassment. Yeah. We didn't need that kind of harassment.
Was the guy a lifer? Was he a long-term service guy? Yeah.
He'd already probably been in the military for 15, 18 years. Yeah. I mean, this was probably his second, maybe his third tour. You just never knew. But he was, he pushed the wrong buttons. You don't mess with the guys that are keeping you in the rear, making the same money that we're making out in the jungle, and you've got a cot, and you've got electricity, and you've got hot meals, and you can go get a beer every night and go watch movies, and you're going to mess with us, and that's what happens. I mean, that's what happened. And it was one of those incidents that I'd heard about him, and but I thought, I remember that one because that one, it happened. And luckily nobody was killed, but at least it got him out of their hair. Guys would let their hair grow. If they want to put up with a steel pot and that heat and humidity on there, and let them grow their hair if that's what they want. Let them go. Let them do their own thing.
Yeah, just a small thing. I mean, did you shave when you were out in the field?
Yeah. Well, between brushing the teeth and shaving, you ain't going to waste the water, guy. Trust me. The water is too precious to you. They would do that. But I was, I was 21. I didn't have to shave till I was 25 or something. Nothing ever showed up anyway, you know. But other guys, yeah. I had one guy that could shave in the morning. By noon, it looked like he needed a shave. But you know, he carried the machine gun, so nobody messed with him.
All right then. Well, look, it makes for a very good story, and you've done a very good job with it. So I'd just like to close out here by thanking you for coming in and talking to me today.
Well, like I said, it's an important story. It's an important part of the story. It's just one of small number of people. The big issue that I always look at is that 1 in every 10 Vietnam veterans was combat infantry. 9 of those other guys that are Vietnam veterans, they were in the rear. They had great jobs, but they still made the same money. That's always one of those things that people say, well, there were 5 million people that served in war. Yes, but there are only 500,000 that were Vietnam, that were infantry. You know, the numbers are small, guys, of how many actual got the CIB, Combat Infantry Badge. It's a small number of the big one, the big picture. We were all there to do a job. We all did our, and we were, it didn't end like we wanted it to, but we did our best to make sure it ended right. So, all right. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, that's actually the whole, one of the sort of central ideas of the book I'm going to be working on over the next year.
Okay.
Is to take a lot of these, use a set of interviews that we've done as kind of a starting point, a basis, and to follow a group of different veterans with different sets of experiences through their tours. Going to use the model of the interview to kind of, and we're doing a lot of research and stuff to make sure that the collective picture we create is one that fits the larger one.
Right.
But the central message is, most of these guys went over and they did their job and by and large did the best they could with the circumstances.
That's all you could do.
And you have bad stuff, but not a lot of the bad stuff. There's also stuff that happens in other wars.
Yes.
And
Well, we can go through this book. I can show you some of the pictures that relate a lot to what we just talked about.
Yeah.
Okay.